The night Yuri came home crying, the house was already half asleep, the kind of quiet that feels like a blanket you can't quite breathe under. Our porch light cast a pale oval on the front steps. The dishwasher finished its cycle with a soft chime and then settled into silence. I'd left one lamp on in the living room, warm, honeyed light pooling on the rug, because Yuri had said he'd be home soon. And in our marriage, soon could mean anything from 15 minutes to 3 hours, depending on traffic, friends, and whatever mood he was trying not to name. My name is Hannah. I was 35 then, the age where you learn how to carry two truths at once. You can love someone fiercely and still feel lonely right beside them. Yuri was 37, broad-shouldered, gentle-eyed, the kind of man strangers asked for directions because he looked trustworthy. He wore his kindness like a second skin, and sometimes I wondered if that skin got heavy. That evening had started like nothing. A Tuesday. An ordinary dinner, leftover pasta, the cheap Parmesan we both pretended was fine, and a half argument about whether we should replace the living room curtains. Yuri kissed my cheek absent-mindedly, said he needed to clear his head and go for a drive. I'd nodded because I'd learned that pressing him when he was tight behind the eyes only made him retreat further into himself. I told myself space was a kindness, not an avoidance. Still, as the hours stacked up, I checked my phone more than I wanted to admit. No texts, no updates. My mind did what minds do when they're given silence. It filled the silence with scenarios, an accident, a breakdown, a bar, a secret. At 11:47, I finally gave up on pretending I wasn't worried and climbed into bed with the book I wasn't reading. I remember the exact sentence I stared at for 5 minutes without absorbing, the words melting into each other like wax. Somewhere close to midnight, I must have dozed off because the sound of the front door opening jolted me awake with a sharp rush of adrenaline. I listened for his footsteps. Usually I could tell his mood by the way he moved through the house. Heavy and loud when he was irritated, light and careful when he was trying not to disturb me. That night, there was a hesitation in the entryway, like he was bracing himself, then a soft sound, a choked inhale. I sat up, heart already sprinting. "Yuri!" I called into the dark. No answer. I swung my feet onto the floor and stepped into the hallway. The house was cool under my bare soles. I could see the living room lamp still on, a little island of light ahead, and in that light, Yuri stood with his back to me, shoulders shaking. At first, I didn't understand what I was seeing. He was still wearing his jacket, but it hung open like he'd forgotten it was there. His hair looked damp at the temples. His hands were braced on the back of the couch as if he needed it to stay upright. When he turned his head, the truth hit me like a physical thing. Mascara, black and smudged, streaked beneath his eyes. Not a neat line, not a playful touch of makeup. This was mascara that had been cried through, dragged and blurred into a shadowy bruise. His cheeks were blotched, his mouth trembling like he was trying to hold it still. My body went cold. "Oh my God," I whispered, crossing the room in 3 steps. "Yuri, what happened?" He tried to speak and couldn't. His throat worked like he was swallowing glass. He looked at me with those gentle eyes and something in them that I'd never seen so naked. Panic. He rasped. He pressed a fist to his mouth. A sob broke free anyway, startling and raw. I reached for him, instinctive, my hands on his arms, on his shoulders, grounding him in the only way I knew. "Hey," I said, soft but urgent. "You're home. You're safe. Just breathe. Look at me. Look at me." He did, and his eyes shone. The mascara made the whites look even brighter. "I'm sorry," he said, words tumbling out like he couldn't stop them. "Hannah, I'm so sorry." The phrase slid under my ribs and lodged there. Sorry for what? Sorry because he'd been gone too long. Sorry because he'd scared me. Sorry because something terrible had happened to him. "What are you sorry for?" I asked, keeping my voice steady on purpose. In our marriage, I'd become the steady one by default. The boat in rough water, the person who didn't get to fall apart first. Yuri's breath hitched. He looked down at his hands like they belonged to someone else. "I did something," he whispered, and I can't carry it." My stomach tightened. "Did someone hurt you?" I asked, because my mind went to the worst place first. "Yuri, tell me if someone hurt you." He shook his head quickly. No, it wasn't." He swallowed hard, eyes squeezing shut. "It wasn't like that." I waited. The lamp buzzed faintly. The house felt like it was leaning in to listen. He opened his eyes again, and they were full of shame, so dense it looked like weight. I met someone, he said. My heartbeat thudded in my ears. Met someone, I repeated, because sometimes repeating is the only way to keep yourself from exploding. He nodded, a tiny motion. A man, he said, and the word landed between us with a strange kind of heaviness, not because it was a man, but because it was a confession shaped like a door opening. I blinked, trying to keep my face neutral while my insides scrambled. Yuri wasn't the kind of man I'd ever pictured cheating, and yet I'd learned the hard way that the people you love can still do things you didn't think they were capable of. Okay, I said carefully. And? His lips parted. He looked like he might throw up. We hooked up, he whispered. The world didn't shatter loudly. It didn't collapse in a cinematic crash. It was quieter than that, which somehow made it worse. It was a small shift, like a seam ripping. For a moment, I couldn't speak. My hands were still on his arms, and suddenly I was aware of how warm his skin felt through the fabric, how human he was even in the midst of hurting me. I let go slowly, not because I wanted distance, but because I needed air. When? I managed. Tonight, he said, voice breaking. I didn't plan it. I swear I didn't go out looking for it like a predator. I was out. I was lonely, and he was kind. Kind. The word made something sharp flare in my chest. Not anger exactly, something closer to grief. I stared at him, trying to rearrange my understanding of my life. Were you wearing makeup? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The mascara on his face felt like another layer of this I didn't yet understand. Yuri flinched. Yes, he admitted. I dressed. I do that sometimes. He swallowed. I did it tonight, and then I went out. My throat tightened. It wasn't the makeup that shocked me so much as the part of him I apparently hadn't been invited to know. Sometimes, I repeated. How long have you been doing that? He squeezed his eyes shut. Years, he said, and the word came out like a confession and a punishment all at once. Not every week, not even every month, but enough that I can't pretend it's not real. I felt myself swaying and grabbed the arm of the couch. The room seemed to expand around me, too big and too bright. So you went out dressed, I said, piecing it together like a puzzle that cut my fingers. And you met a man, and you hooked up. Yuri nodded, tears spilling. And now I feel like I'm going to die, he whispered. Because I love you. I love you so much, Hannah. And I still did it. And I can't stand myself. A sound escaped me, half laugh, half sob. You came home with mascara on, I said, my voice shaky. You came home crying. Why? He shook his head like he couldn't believe he had to explain. Because it was real, he said. Not just a fantasy in my head, not just a secret. It happened, and he was gentle. His voice cracked on the last word. He treated me like I wasn't disgusting, and then I left, and all I could think about was you, about what I was doing to us. I pressed my palm to my forehead. In my mind, images flickered. Yuri in a bathroom mirror applying mascara with careful hands. Yuri walking into a bar with his heart in his throat. Yuri laughing, maybe, with someone who didn't know he was married. Yuri letting someone touch him with kindness. Yuri coming home and breaking open in our living room. I wanted to scream. I also wanted to hold him. Both urges battled inside my ribs. Did you use protection? I asked, because my brain clung to the practical, to something measurable when everything emotional was on fire. Yes, he said immediately. Yes, always. I'm not reckless. I'm not trying to ruin us. I know that sounds insane after what I just said, but he shook his head. I was careful, I swear. Have you done this before? My voice came out flat, which was the only way I could get the question out without collapsing. Yuri's face twisted. He looked like he was standing at the edge of a cliff. Not like tonight, he said. I've flirted. I've talked. I've let men buy me drinks when I was dressed. I liked being seen. He swallowed. But I haven't crossed this line before. I studied him, searching for any hint of manipulation, any rehearsed excuse. But Yuri looked wrecked. He looked like someone who'd finally stopped holding his breath and didn't know how to inhale again. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, softer now, because beneath the anger there was a real question. Why didn't you tell me you were dressing? Why didn't you tell me any of this? He let out a sound that was almost a whimper. Because I was terrified, he said. That you'd leave, that you'd look at me and see a stranger, that you'd think I was a joke, or a liar, or less of a man, or too much of one. I didn't know what you'd think, so I kept it locked up. And now you unlocked it by... I stopped myself from saying the word that would cut too deeply, at least right then. By doing this. I know, he whispered. I know. He slid down onto the couch like his legs had finally given out. His shoulders sagged, his hands were shaking. The mascara on his face made him look like someone who'd survived a storm. I sat on the edge of the coffee table across from him because I needed a barrier, something to keep my emotions from rushing directly into his. I stared at the rug, at the tiny fibers, at the mundane pattern that suddenly seemed absurdly important because it was real and tangible. I don't know what to do with this, I said. My voice sounded far away. Yuri looked up. Tell me what you need, he said, desperate. Anything. I'll do anything. I'll stop. I'll never do it again. Stop, I said sharply, and he froze. Don't promise me things you can't keep. Not tonight. Not when you're terrified. Not when I'm like this. He blinked, tears still falling. Okay, he whispered. I breathed in slowly. My chest hurt. I need the truth, I said. All of it. Not bits and pieces. Not years. And sometimes, I need to know what our marriage is actually made of. Yuri nodded, wiping at his face with the sleeve of his jacket, smearing the mascara further. Okay, he said. Ask me anything. So I did. I asked where he went. He told me a small lounge downtown, not far from the river. A place he'd driven past 100 times and only entered when he was dressed because it felt like a different world. I asked how he learned to do makeup. YouTube, he admitted with a shaky laugh that died immediately. I asked if he had clothes. Yes, hidden. A small storage locker. My stomach clenched at the thought of him keeping a whole part of himself in a rented box, like shame paid monthly. I asked what it felt like. He searched for words like a person trying to describe color to someone who'd never seen it. It feels like exhaling, he said finally. Like I can stop being braced all the time. Like I can be softer and it's not dangerous. Dangerous, I repeated, because that word told me more than he realized. He nodded. When I'm Yuri, I'm always guarding, performing masculinity without thinking about it. When I'm dressed, it's like I get to step outside that. Some men, look at me differently. They treat me differently. His voice dropped. Sometimes they're cruel, sometimes they're not. Tonight he wasn't. My throat tightened again. And you wanted that, I said, not as an accusation, but as a fact. Yes, he whispered. I wanted to feel wanted. I wanted to feel seen. I stared at him for a long moment, and a strange tenderness pressed against my anger. Not because what he did was okay, betrayal doesn't become okay because it comes wrapped in tears, but because I could see the loneliness that had been living inside my husband, a loneliness I'd missed. Or maybe I hadn't missed it. Maybe I'd been pretending it was something else. I thought of all the nights we'd sat on the couch, scrolling separately on our phones, bodies touching, but minds miles apart. I thought of the way Yuri sometimes flinched when his friends made jokes about real men, how he laughed too loudly as if to prove he belonged. I thought of the moments he'd seemed almost hungry for softness, for permission, for something he didn't know how to ask me for. Still, the ache in my chest didn't dissolve. You could have told me, I said, voice trembling. You could have let me be your wife in this. You took that from me. Yuri's face crumpled. I know, he whispered, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Something in me finally broke, and tears came hot and fast. I hated crying in front of him right then. It felt like giving him proof of the damage. but my body didn't care what I wanted. "I'm not angry that you're like this," I said through tears, gesturing vaguely at his face, the mascara, the confession. "I'm angry that you lied. I'm angry that you gave someone else something that belonged to us without asking me." Yuri nodded, sobbing quietly now. "I know," he said again, like it was the only sentence he deserved. We sat in that messy truth for a long time. At some point, he went to the bathroom and washed his face. The sink ran. He returned with damp cheeks, bare-eyed, looking exhausted and small. He sat at the other end of the couch like a man afraid of taking up space. "I don't know what happens now," I said finally, "but I know we can't go back to pretending." Yuri swallowed. "No," he agreed, "we can't." What followed wasn't a neat montage of healing. It was the slow, unglamorous work of rebuilding reality. That first night, we didn't decide anything except that we would tell the truth. I slept in the guest room, not because I wanted to punish him, but because my nervous system felt like it was buzzing, and I needed space to hear my own thoughts. In the morning, my eyes were swollen. Yuri looked worse, like he'd been awake all night staring into the dark. He made coffee, hands moving automatically, and set a mug in front of me like an offering. "I'll answer anything," he said quietly, "and I'll do whatever you need to feel safe." Safe. The word felt enormous. Over the next week, we talked more than we had in months, maybe years. We talked in the kitchen, in the car, on walks around our neighborhood where we kept our voices low like the trees might gossip. We talked about desire and shame and how long Yuri had been carrying this alone. We talked about how my trust felt bruised, how every affectionate moment now carried an aftertaste of doubt. We found a couples therapist. We didn't treat it like a last resort. We treated it like a tool. In the therapist's office, soft lighting, clean tissues, a chair that was too comfortable, Yuri said the words I hadn't realized I needed to hear. "I cheated." No hedging, no softening, just the truth. And I said, "I'm hurt," not, "I'm fine," not, "we'll get through it," just the truth. The therapist asked us what we wanted underneath the fear, not what we felt obligated to want, not what our parents would approve of, what we actually wanted. At first I didn't know. I thought I wanted a rewind button. I thought I wanted to erase the image of Yuri in mascara, crying in our living room, saying another man had been kind to him. But the more we talked, the more I realized something unsettling. That image wasn't only pain, it was also honesty. It was the first time Yuri had stopped performing for me. One afternoon, after a session where we both cried in that polite, upholstered room, Yuri said, "There's more I'm scared to tell you." I looked at him across the kitchen table. "Tell me anyway," I said, voice steady with effort. He took a breath. "When I'm dressed," he said, "I feel beautiful, and I feel guilty for feeling that, like beauty is something I'm stealing." My chest tightened. I thought of all the women who grow up learning beauty is both currency and punishment, and my husband had been tasting it in secret, ashamed of enjoying it. "You're not stealing anything," I said quietly. He looked at me like he didn't believe he was allowed to hear that. We started rebuilding our relationship not around rules, but around consent. That was the difference. Yuri had acted without consent. He'd stepped outside our marriage with someone else without telling me, and that was the wound. Healing then had to mean we stopped doing anything without consent, emotionally, sexually, relationally. We talked about monogamy, what it meant to us, what we'd assumed it meant, what we'd never actually negotiated. Because that's the thing, most couples don't negotiate monogamy. They inherit it like furniture and hope it fits. Yuri told me he didn't want to leave me. He told me he loved me as Hannah, as home, as the person who knew the real him, even if she didn't know all of him yet. He told me the hookup hadn't been about replacing me. It had been about escaping shame for one night. "Then why did you come home?" I asked him once in a quieter moment. "Why didn't you just keep it a secret like everything else?" He stared at his hands. "Because I couldn't," he said. "Because the kindness made me realize how much I'd been starving. And then I realized I'd been starving right next to you. Not because you didn't feed me, because I wouldn't open my mouth." That sentence knocked something loose in me. It didn't erase the betrayal, but it made the betrayal make sense in a way that didn't feel like a condemnation of my worth. Eventually, we reached a point where our choices became clear. We could try to return to the old marriage, the one built on silence and performance, and hope Yuri's secret self would just disappear. Or we could build a new marriage, one that had room for the truth, even if that truth was complicated. I surprised myself by wanting the second option. Not because I was thrilled by what happened, not because I was suddenly cool with betrayal, but because the alternative felt like slow death. Because once you've seen your spouse in full collapse, once you've seen the cost of shame, you can't unknow it. We drew boundaries like maps. We made agreements in clear language with room for revision. Yuri got tested. I got tested. We chose safety as a foundation, not an afterthought. We agreed, no more secrets. If Yuri wanted to dress, he would tell me. If he wanted to go out, we'd talk first. If anything beyond flirting was on the table, it required explicit agreement before, not after. We created check-ins, not to control each other, but to stay connected. And I named my non-negotiable. No more lying to protect me from the truth. It doesn't protect me. It isolates me. Yuri cried when I said that. Not the same broken sobs as that first night. This was quieter, relief. As we built this new structure, something shifted in our intimacy too. Not immediately, not magically, but slowly, like dawn seeping into a room. Yuri began to relax around me. He stopped bracing. He talked about his feelings without wrapping them in jokes. I started feeling less like a manager of our household and more like a partner again. One night, months later, Yuri asked if he could show me something. We were in our bedroom, the same space where we'd once folded laundry and fought about curtains. He stood at the doorframe like he was asking permission to exist. I want you to meet her, he said softly, the part of me I've been hiding. My heart thudded. Okay, I said. He disappeared into the bathroom. I heard the soft clink of something, maybe jewelry. Minutes passed. I sat on the bed with my hands clenched in my lap, unsure what I would feel when he returned. When the door opened, Yuri stepped out transformed, not in a theatrical way, but in a careful one. His face was softly made up, foundation, a gentle contour, mascara that looked intentional and not like tears. His hair was styled differently, a wig that framed his face in a way that made his cheekbones look sharper. He wore a simple dress, nothing flashy, just something that fit his body and made him stand taller. He looked at me with fear and hope threaded together. Hi, he whispered. I felt a swell of emotion so complex it almost made me laugh. There was grief, because this was what he'd hidden. There was awe, because he looked right. There was tenderness, because he was shaking. You're beautiful, I said, and the words came out as truth before I could second-guess them. Yuri's eyes filled. He covered his mouth with one hand, as if the compliment was too much to receive. Then he laughed, a small broken sound. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you. In that moment, I understood something I hadn't before. Yuri hadn't been chasing men just for sex. He'd been chasing permission. He'd been chasing a mirror that didn't spit him back out. It didn't mean the betrayal was okay. It meant the desire behind it was human. Our new marriage wasn't perfect. It required constant communication, constant humility. It required me to admit when jealousy flared. It required Yuri to admit when shame tempted him back into secrecy. We didn't always get it right the first time, but we got it right more often than we used to. The night that had cracked us open didn't end us. It ended the version of us that couldn't survive honesty. Sometimes I still remember that first image. Yuri in the living room, mascara smudged, shaking with guilt and grief. It still hurts, but now it also feels like the beginning of something braver. Because he came home. He told the truth. He let the ugliness of his shame be seen instead of polished into silence. And I learned something about love that I wish I'd known sooner. Love isn't just devotion, it's also negotiation. It's the willingness to rebuild the house when the foundation shifts, and to do it together in daylight with no locked rooms. If you ask me when our marriage changed, I could say the night he cheated. But the deeper answer is this. Our marriage changed the moment Yuri stopped lying and I stopped pretending the truth would destroy us. It didn't destroy us. It demanded that we become real. And in that reality, messy, tender, consensual, honest, we found each other again.